Hello, everyone, and welcome to Self-Care and Intersectionality, the fourth and final webinar of this series on self-care that we started just over a month ago. My name is Leandra Lacey, and I'm the Senior Manager of Capacity Building and Member Engagement for the National Coalition of STD Directors. NCSD is a national public health membership organization representing health department STD directors, their support staff, and community-based partners across 50 states, 7 large cities, and 5 U.S. territories. We acknowledge the hard work that our members do to serve their communities and promote public health. The COVID pandemic, the heightened visibility of racial injustices in our country, and the fact that this is a presidential election year have further exacerbated feelings of stress for many people. We wanted to offer this series as a way to provide tangible resources and tools to our members for self-care and creating team environments where self-care is a priority, all while using a trauma-informed and intersectional lens. So the first 2 webinars in this series focused on giving you some background on what self-care is and how to establish it for yourself. The third webinar focused on self-care and supervision and how to encourage self-care with employees at your organization. And then today's webinar, the final installment in this series, will focus on self-care and its crucial role for people living at the intersections of various identities. So just a few housekeeping items before we move forward. All of you have been muted once you enter Adobe Connect. If you have questions or need technical help during this call, please use the chat box on the right side of your screen. You can also private message me or my colleague Tiffany Haskell, as we are both hosts today. All questions for Robert George, our presenter, will be addressed at the end, but we will keep a queue, so please send them our way in the chat box as they come up. This webinar is being recorded. The recording and presentation slides will be emailed to those that registered, and the materials will also be placed on the NCSD website. So I'll go ahead and give this final introduction of Robert. Robert George has worked for over 20 years in the field of HIV. His experience has included case management, behavioral health, and housing services, as well as prevention services, including syringe access programming. He has managed and supported programs in both urban and rural areas of Colorado. For a brief time, he worked as a consultant, providing training and capacity building to HIV case management programs across the country. Currently, Robert is the program manager for the Ryan White Part A program in Denver. He and his team are dedicated to providing high-quality support to programs providing HIV care and treatment services in the Denver area. Robert uses a trauma-informed approach in his work in order to create healthy environments for programs and providers to do their best work and effectively serve their communities. And I will hand it over to you, Robert.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. This is the last part of the series that we've been doing on self-care, and I just appreciate all of you who are attending today, and those of you who have attended all of the sessions that we've done, or even part of them. I just really appreciate you joining us in this conversation, and I'm really sad that it's ending, but I definitely hope that I have some interactions with you all in the future, and of course you have my contact information if you want to make contact outside of the training. So again, my name is Robert George, and I am the Ryan White grantee for the Denver TGA out in Colorado. And I work for the Denver Department of Public Health and Environment. We also have a Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, which is our Part B partners, and we work really closely with them. But that's who I work for right now. I just want to say that this is not an official presentation from the department. It's really my own presentation, and this information comes from my own experiences and my own research and study and practice around these topics. And again, we're going to do the presentation content. I'll present the content to you, and then You can always ask questions in the chat during the presentation if something comes up for you, but definitely at the end we'll have opportunity to answer any questions that you might have, or would love to hear your comments as well. So our objectives today, we're going to just touch briefly on self-care again, and we're going to talk about self-care and its privilege. We're going to define intersectionality. We're going to talk about the layers of trauma and healing components. We're going to describe the importance of language in relation to intersectionality. Oh, and I see again that I've misspelled microaggressions. I leave off that second G. We're going to define microaggressions and responses, and then we're just going to end with the 6 trauma-informed principles. So as you've seen with my trainings, I always just like to ask these big and broad questions. And so when I do these trainings in person, this is one of my favorite questions to engage the group with. And when I do these trainings in person, we're able to have more open conversations. And this question, what brought you to this work, I think is so important when we're talking about self-care, because it's really nice to reconnect with that question, because I know we all come to this work for really great and inspiring reasons. But when we're experiencing all the stresses and the pressures and the challenges of the work, it takes that reason sometimes out of focus. So I think it's important to remind ourselves of our connection to the work in order to re-inspire us and re-engage us when we're feeling particularly down. I think it's also nice to have this conversation with your teammates as a way to get to know each other and get to know what everybody's values and inspirations are. We've done this on our team a few times recently, and it's just really nice to just reconnect with that. And we're also inspired by each other's experience as well. So, as I said, usually when I do this in person, I'm able to ask this question and we're able to talk more about it. But since we're doing this virtually, I'm going to ask Leandra to put up poll question number 1. And we're just going to try to do this in a way that you all might be able to share what brought you to this work. So I just put up in this question a few reasons why, and I'd love to hear from you around that. Like, I want to help people, I care about the cause, someone inspired me, I want to make a difference, I'm part of the community I serve, something higher brought me to this work, I'm really not sure, or maybe you have another reason that brought you to this work. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you about what brought you to this work. Some good responses. We're seeing all kinds of things. Let's go ahead and broadcast those results, Leandra. Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of folks came to this work because they want to help people. I think that's definitely one of those motivating, inspiring things that bring us to this work, caring about the cause, having a passion for it, wanting to make a difference. I see part of the community I serve. Wanting to make a difference in our own communities is a really inspiring thing that brings us to this work. And something higher brought me to it. Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say that there's a spiritual experience associated with doing this work, and that inspires and motivates us to engage. So thank you for sharing those. It's so fun to be able to hear what people's experiences are. All right, thanks, Leandra. We can take that one down. All right, I just want to touch on self-care. We're not going to completely revisit all of the concepts, but just want to touch on it again because this series has been about self-care. And today, when we're talking about intersectionality, we're really talking about ourselves and some awareness around ourselves. And we're also talking about some awareness of others that we work with, whether that's our teammates or our clients. We're also talking about our communities. And so I think I like the term us care when we're talking more broadly about self-care, where we're talking about our interactions with others and even our responsibilities to others to create safe and healthy spaces. So That's what we're really going to be talking about today, but I don't want to lose our concepts around self-care. So I know some of you have been with me on all of these trainings, so I have a couple of just poll questions to ask you. So just to see if you remember some of the things we talked about. So Leandra, can we do poll question number 2, please? Great. So I asked this question: self-care practice, and then we complete the sentence, prevents stressful events from happening or reduces the impact of a stressful event will have on me? And we've talked about that, what self-care practice does in relation to stress. Seeing some answers coming in. Give you a second to answer if you haven't. Okay, let's go ahead and broadcast those results. Yes, great. Everybody, agrees. So self-care practice doesn't prevent stressful events from happening, but it really helps us to be able to manage those and navigate those in a way where the stress will have less impact on us as an individual. So, all right, thanks, Leandra, for that one. And Leandra, if you can go ahead and post poll question number 3 as well. It's another review question. Oh, number 3. Sorry. Great, yeah. All right, so and then another review question is, an aim of self-care is to take care of my physical, mental, and emotional needs. Is that true or false? We talked about, we had a list of aims around self-care, if you remember those, and define what those aims or goals could be. So, let's go ahead and broadcast those results. And yes, that is true. An aim of self-care is to take care of physical, mental, and emotional needs. And we'll just touch on that briefly here in a second. Okay, thank you, Leandra. Okay, so if you remember, I used this definition of self-care. Of course, my big question is, what does self-care mean to you? But in helping you define that for yourself, I shared this definition that I like, and with the highlight that self-care helps to reduce the impacts of stress and maintain our shorter and long-term health and well-being. I like to focus on health and well-being as a part of what we talk about with self-care. And again, the aims that we talked about was taking care of our physical and psychological health, managing and reducing stress, honoring our emotional and spiritual needs, fostering and sustaining relationships, and achieving that balance between our personal and our work lives. So now I'm going to throw a little bit of wrench, I think, into what I've been talking about during these last 3 sessions. And yes, the privilege of self-care. So I definitely agree with the thought that self-care can be a privilege and that not everyone has this privilege. But I do believe that self-care is important. And I hope that everyone has the space to take care of their health and their wellness. But it's also important that we recognize that there are people who don't have the ability, the time, the energy, the knowledge, or the resources to engage in self-care activities on a regular basis. I also recognize that there are particular times in our lives where self-care doesn't seem to be realistic. Sometimes we're just trying to survive the day and that's all we can do. And this is true for people who are living in trauma situations that are systematic and that there doesn't appear to be a way out. And if you remember in our first training, we talked about barriers to self-care and ways that we could work through those barriers. And a couple that we mentioned was the lack of time and the lack of money. And I recognize that we can talk about ways that we can change and impact those barriers. But again, those barriers are really real for some people. And again, survival might be the immediate focus. So just having that recognition that for some people self-care is a privilege is really important. And in helping us to put it a little bit of perspective on this concept. So knowing that self-care is a privilege, so what do we do? How do we work with that? And so I just have a few things here that I just want to bring up. And the first one is bring some sensitivity to self-care. I think in my experience, we talk about self-care so much and the importance of it, and we place such a heavy value on it that sometimes it seems like if you're not engaging in self-care, then you might be doing something wrong. And so I think we need to make sure that we're being sensitive around that for folks who aren't able to engage in a self-care practice. And so bringing sensitivity. Don't brag about all the things you're doing for self-care and how amazing you're feeling, and don't try to set other expectations or set expectations for others around self-care, what self-care should look like. And again, that's why I asked the question, what does self-care mean for you? Because it's different for everyone, and maybe right now someone may not be practicing self-care. I think that it's also important for us to pause our judgment again, but turn on our curiosity. So just, again, being mindful of what everybody's experience might be around self-care, but being curious about what's going on for folks and maybe what some of those barriers and challenges might be, because maybe there's something that we can do to help each other when it comes to self-care. Also, offer to practice self-care with each other. Create a safe place where maybe together you can do some self-care practice. Invite folks in your self-care practice without pressure or expectation, but in a way that might give them exposure to something they may not have considered, or that they may not have been able to do on their own. And also be open to engage with others in their self-care practices as well if they invite you into it. And being a listening ear. This in itself can be a form of self-care or us-care, because there's nothing that's any more healing, I feel, than being listened to by another caring person. And of course, you as the person listening, you have to recognize what your boundaries and capacity might be at that moment to help others and to listen to others. But it's really powerful when you're able to provide that space for someone, but it's also very powerful when you receive that from someone as well. So being a listening ear when someone's wanting to talk about their stress or their challenges or their experiences can be a really healing practice. Let's do poll question number 4, please, Leandra. So I just want to get just a sense of in the room, like if we would agree with this statement that self-care is a privilege. And it's okay if you don't. I just wanted to get a temperature of where people are with that. And so, yeah, just yes, no, or maybe you're unsure about that. Okay. Yeah, we got quite a few responses here. Let's take a second if you're still thinking about it, because I think it is something to consider, and maybe you haven't considered it before, and maybe it's a new idea to think about. Okay, let's go ahead and broadcast those results. Looks like the majority of people would agree that self-care is a privilege. Some people don't agree with that, and that's okay. And then some folks are unsure. I think that it's, I think that really just tells us that it's something that we can explore and just be more aware of and engage in some curiosity around with others, just so that we can understand a little bit more what other folks' experience might be. So thank you, Leandra. Okay, now I want to talk about intersectionality. So first of all, I'm going to define it. I'm a big fan of dictionary definitions, and there's a lot of definitions about intersectionality and a lot of readings and studying research, and I like to go back to dictionary definitions too to see what they say. So Merriam-Webster's definition of intersectionality is that it's a complex, cumulative way in which the effects of multiple forms of discrimination, such as racism, sexism, homophobia, and classism, combine, overlap, or intersect. And this term was originally, it came into existence in 1989 by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a Black woman. She's an attorney. She's a law scholar. She's a civil rights activist and a civil rights scholar as well. And she first started talking about this term in 1989 when she, in her writings, she said that traditional feminist ideas and anti-racist policies exclude Black women because Black women face overlapping discrimination unique to them. And she also says that because the intersectional experience is greater than the sum of racism and sexism, any analysis that does not take intersectionality into account cannot sufficiently address the particular manner in which Black women are subordinated. And so that was her original writings. That was her original concept when she started talking about intersectionality. It was really talking about anti-racist and feminist activism, and how that didn't always include Black women and their particular experience. And then over time, of course, and she will definitely continue to talk about just the broader concepts of intersectionality and considering all the different ways that people identify and all the different pieces of individuals that bring diversity to the table. And I really like what she says about intersectional experience being greater than the sum of racism and sexism, just to emphasize the importance of paying attention to the concepts of intersectionality when in identity, when considering equity and diversity. I really, really encourage you to engage in reading and listening to Kimberly Crenshaw. She's really amazing. There's a lot of good readings out there about her. There's a lot of good videos and TED Talks. She recently, I just saw something that she was quoted in just today, just considering some of the things that have been going on this year, particularly around anti-racist movements. And it's just really powerful and just really brings us to really the point of what's going on. I would want to say, though, that one of the TED Talks that I listened to her recently, it was really, she had this opening powerful illustration that I just want to share with you all. And it was in regard to police violence that Black communities are experiencing right now. And so she started out the talk with everybody in the audience standing up. And then she explains that she will say some names of some people. And then if folks in the audience haven't heard of those individuals or doesn't know anything about them, then they could sit down. So then she goes on to say the names of Black men who've been killed by police, and most of the audience remains standing. And then she moves on to start talking to name Black women who've been killed by police, and most of the audience sits down. And so she's really illustrating the point there about how we need to be aware more broadly about the experiences of individuals when we're talking about these topics, and in particular, this topic about anti-racist movements, police violence, and those things that are really in the forefront of what's going on in our society right now. So paying attention to the concerns of women who identify as BIPOC, women who are trans, women who are gay, women who are living with disabilities, and how these identities make up our larger communities that are affected by these particular issues. And so bringing that, to us, it's important to be mindful of these intersections of identities and experiences of our team, making sure that we're aware of how our policies and organizational culture makes our workspaces unsafe or safe for our team and for our clients as well. A lot of organizations are engaging in trainings right now about anti-racism, equity, and diversity, and it's important to make sure that intersectionality is a part of this training, because one training may not be able to meet all the needs of the individuals that we work with. So I just really encourage you to consider that when you're putting together trainings in your own organization. So what are some of the things that we can do when it comes to, what are the actions that we can take when it comes to intersectionality? First of all, I like to just say, be aware of your space. How do the members of your team and your clients identify? What are their concerns? Making sure that we're considering all the things, such as gender, race, ethnicity, religion, disabilities, both physical and mental. And of course, that's not an exhaustive list, but so don't limit to those things I just mentioned, but just think broadly and start to pay attention who is present and who's not present in the room. Since we're doing all of our meetings virtually, the participants in the meetings are all right in front of us, right? So this has given me an opportunity to pay attention when I'm having some community conversations about who is and who's not in the room, and who do we need to have in the room, and who do we need to invite to be a part of these conversations. And then center the voices. Allow safe space for people to speak, share their experience, and bring awareness to their needs. Listen, and I say this a lot, but listening is so important, and speaking less and listening more is something I think that many of us who are in those positions of privilege could do. And then be a link, be a conduit, include this awareness in our work. Include the feedback and the input in the development of your policies and your culture and your programming development. And when it comes to providing services for clients, reviewing the data and developing programming and services that are responsive to the data that we see, and use the data to make the connections around the intersections of the folks we serve. I know that our community planning group, when it comes to HIV, loves data and loves the data that we put together for them, and they're always trying to make the connections, and we are always encouraging them to do that as well, so that we can have the most responsive services available. Collaborate with community, build relationships and other resources with people who can meet these broad and diverse needs, because we can't all do this on our own and do it all well. It really is important that we have those relationships so that we can all work together. And then show up. Show up for meetings and events. Listen, learn, and improve. And not only show up, but stay, because sometimes it's going to feel uncomfortable for some of us, but those uncomfortable situations are where we learn the most. And work is not always supposed to be comfortable, and this work is not always supposed to be comfortable, and it won't be. So, but just showing up and being there is so important, and then folks feel like they're being heard. Because when intersectionality informs the development of our work culture, our organizational policies and service development, then we'll create a physically and psychologically safe space that will create healthy environments for our staff and our clients. So let's put up poll question number 5, please, Leandra. So after just talking about this, I just wanted to get a temperature to see what you all think, if intersectionality is recognized and responded to in your workplace. Because if maybe you're feeling like it's not, maybe you can bring some more attention to this and some more awareness to intersectionality and make it part of the work that you're doing around equity, diversity, and anti-racism. Maybe you're not sure. Maybe this is a new concept for you, and that's okay too, because we all have opportunities and space to learn, and that's what we're here for. Let's go ahead and broadcast those results, Leandra. Yeah, it looks like most of folks are feeling like intersectionality is recognized, and that's really wonderful to hear. Some folks are saying that it might not be, or they're not sure. And so, I think that this is a great opportunity to start exploring that and to consider it and work with it further. So thank you, Leandra. All right. We're going to move next into intersectionality and trauma. So I want to, again, talk about trauma, maybe this time it'll be in a more broader way, because when we're talking about intersectionality, I think it's also important to think about some of the intersections of trauma experiences that people have and bring with them. We spend a lot of time talking about trauma on the individual and that individual experience when we talk about trauma, and we talk about trauma-informed care, but it definitely is broader than that. So I first of all want to talk about the interacting layers of trauma. And here they are. So from a bigger concept, we're talking about historical trauma. We're talking about systemic and institutional trauma. We're talking about community and place trauma, our local environment. And then we're also talking about the individual and interpersonal trauma. So you can see this graphic for me just brings the picture in that intersectional way to life for me, and helps me to see it and be aware of it and consider it in a broader way. So yeah, when we're talking about historical trauma, we're talking about those events in our history that have shaped where we are today and that have been traumatic for people and have even over generations have affected people. We can get into the concept of epigenetics and how trauma can be passed on genetically. But things such as slavery and genocide, colonization, economic exploitation, displacement, white supremacy, those are all of the elements within that historical trauma element that we need to consider and that we are talking about, which is so important for us to be talking about. And then we're talking about systemic and institutional trauma. These are systems that are set up through policies and through laws, things such as the war on drugs, mass incarceration, segregation, anti-immigration policies, redlining, those sorts of things. That the people who are affected by those the most tend to be BIPOC individuals, and that trauma is something that carries through with them over time. And then community and place. These are about our local communities, our local environments and areas. So things that folks are experiencing in their communities, such as violence and exposure to violence, sexual exploitation, lack of safe passage, like getting on a bus sometimes in your community may not always be the safest place, or even going to the grocery store may not be the safest thing for an individual. Communities that are ignored and neglected and underinvested in, or communities where there's over-surveillance, where the police are paying a little bit more attention in those areas, and where a lot of the police violence that we witness happens. And then the individual and interpersonal trauma that we've talked about, those things such as the adverse childhood experiences. We talked about bullying or family system stressors, stresses at work, those sorts of things. The generational transmission we talk about here, that's the epigenetics piece of this too. And I think it's also important for us to consider not only the traumatic experiences, but also what can we do around healing around these areas. And I think this is challenging, and I think this is something that we're trying to do, and that I see folks making the efforts around, and that we and our work can definitely be a part of. So bringing those layers of trauma again, we can look at the healing aspects of those. So a lot of the talk that's been going on around historical trauma includes reconciliations and reparations and redistribution, open borders or no borders, multiracial solidarity, redefining social agreements and how those things work in our society as well. And through systemic and institutional trauma, we can lead with love and justice and engage in restorative practices, really understand folks who've been affected by these policies or folks who have been incarcerated, just bring more care and attention to our communities and to the individuals who are affected by systemic and institutional trauma, as well as bringing some balance around power and bringing and making sure that power is shared. The Denver Principles was one of the initial statements around HIV activism back in the early 80s in 1983, and so we talk about it a lot here locally in Denver, but the Nothing About Us Without Us was definitely one of the messages in those Denver Principles. And then locally, just bringing, in our communities, just bringing some love and care and attention to our communities, bringing some cultural building, some celebration, some affirmations, creating healing spaces. I know a lot of communities bring art and expression to their communities to bring about healing, and creating some power that communities can have, especially when they're being neglected, that they do have a voice, and allowing those voices to be heard. And then, as we've talked about with individuals, we're honoring resilience and by listening and validating, processing and integrating personal and traumatic experience into the healing process, creating safe spaces and trusting spaces and creating relationships is all part of the healing process. And I also like to just talk about like resiliency, because we see a lot of resiliency. I see people every day who experience really horrible traumatic events in their lives, and I can see them really continuing to move forward and continuing to be a place of power and love and healing in their own circles. And I think that folks who have experienced who are affected by the multiple layers of trauma definitely have a lot of resilience. And I think it's really important to recognize that. Resiliency is the capacity to recover from trauma, and we get there through our community and through support and focusing on self-care and us care and focusing on health and wellness and giving meaning and purpose to people, which is like why I like to go back to that first question, what brought us to this work? Because I think that that's where we find our meaning and our purpose. And if we can stay connected to that, it can help us with our resiliency. Next, I want to just talk about language, because when we're talking about intersectionality, language is definitely important. And I've been in the field of HIV for a really long time, and HIV obviously is broader than just the health concerns of people living with HIV. It touches a lot of other fields like mental health and substance use and homelessness. And I've seen us just go through so many different trends in language. And so I just acknowledge that and recognize that. Sometimes we'll use a particular term and it seems to be the most current thing and we're all on it and we're all using it. And then we realize it's not a sensitive term. And so then we move to something that's more sensitive. And this is great. This is about our evolution. This is about our understanding and awareness. And then it's a really good reflection that we're paying attention. We're listening to the impact that language has on people, and we're making adjustments. And also, this takes time and practice to make use of sensitive language and make it a habit. So making sure that when we're considering the importance of language, that we're using people-first language. So examples being saying people experiencing homelessness versus homeless people, or people with HIV or people living with HIV versus HIV-positive people or HIV-infected people. Using people who use drugs versus drug users. Also, we're doing a lot of gender expansion language right now. There's a lot of movements around that, around identifying pronouns or no pronouns, or allowing space for pronouns to be more fluid. I think this is really important. When we're all sharing what our pronouns are, it creates a safe space for people and to feel validated around their own identities. I like to point out negative adjectives that we use. In my community, 2 words that we're using that are continually to be used, and I keep bringing awareness to them, are when we're talking about HIV, is we talk about, and we use the word infected or infection a lot. And so I think it's really important for us to pay attention and about what the impact of that could have when someone hears themselves being talked about using that adjective, as well as the word targeted. I hear just everywhere people talking about target populations, and we need to stop using the word target too. And especially when we're seeing violence against the BIPOC individuals, we need to make sure that our language is also very safe. And we use a lot of military-related language like front lines and boots on the ground and those sort of things. I was talking to someone at our state health department who manages the immunization division, and they were talking about the strike team. They were creating a strike team. And so we were just talking about language and how that doesn't really make people feel safe. And then the language that diminishes people. We are always seeming to identify BIPOC communities as disadvantaged or impoverished or criminal or marginalized or minority. We're using a lot of language that really diminishes communities, and I think it's important to bring some awareness of that and to stop using those language and use language that lifts communities up. So let's do poll question number 6, I think. Let's see. Leandra, if we could pull that one up. I hope I've got yeah, okay, let's use that one, yeah. So which of these reflects a person-first language? People experiencing homelessness, IDU, HIV-infected, target populations? And there's only one answer. And we're talking about person-first language. All right, let's go ahead and broadcast those results. Thank you. Yeah, so people experiencing homelessness. Okay, thank you, Leandra. All right. Now I want to just talk a little bit about microaggressions. We've had some feedback in the surveys from these trainings that folks are interested in knowing how to deal with microaggressions in their workplace, because those are some things that can bring a lot of stress to an individual, especially if you're not really sure how to respond to them, or you don't feel like you have the power to respond to them, and as well as it starts to create unsafe spaces for people when they're experiencing microaggressions on a regular basis. Again, a definition of a microaggression is a comment or action that subtly and often unconsciously or unintentionally expresses a prejudiced attitude. And this concept was originally coined in the 1970s by a Harvard psychiatrist. And then more recently, around the early 2000s, Dr. Su, who is a professor of counseling and psychology at Columbia, started writing about it. And he's written several books on microaggressions, one of them being Microaggressions in Everyday Life, Race, Gender, and Sexual Orientation. And in that book, Dr. Su writes that microaggressions are the everyday slights, the dignities, the put-downs, and insults that members of marginalized, he uses marginalized, I'm not keen on that, but I understand where it's coming from, groups experience in their day-to-day interactions with individuals who are often unaware that they have engaged in an offensive or demeaning way. And why marginalized is hard for me, because I think it just makes people other and pushes people out instead of bringing people in. So that, again, when I'm thinking about language, I want to use language that pulls people in. So, but in his definition, he uses that. I think it's also very interesting because he also just talks about how they might be unintentional, and I, I agree with that. I think that a lot of people who are good-meaning sometimes engage in microaggressions without really understanding, and I think that that's usually from a lack of knowledge or understanding. But I also think that sometimes there's some intention behind microaggressions too. And so I think it's just paying attention to what's needed when someone's experiencing that. I think it's both situations happen in a way where someone's not informed and they don't really understand. But yeah, they both can impact people pretty solidly. So what do we do about microaggressions? There are some actions that we can take when we're experiencing a microaggression, but what I want to say is that these are not always easy, and it definitely puts responsibility on the person who's experiencing the microaggression, which I don't feel is right. And so if we're paying attention to what's going on in conversations and in our interactions with others, if we're witnessing a microaggression, I think it's really helpful if we can step in that moment and take some action. But it is hard, but sometimes when we're experiencing one ourselves, we can step up and address it. And I think that that's also could be very healing for ourselves if we do that. But I just want to just say that it's not always easy when we're experiencing it to take some of these actions. So the first one is to ask for clarification. When someone says something that might be a microaggression, ask them what they're meaning. What are they talking about? What are they trying to say? So getting some clarification there. And then identify the impact. Making a statement, when you say this is the impact that it has on me, or this is the impact that it has on others. And set boundaries. Say that you're not going to engage in that conversation, in that talk, in that way of having in an interaction. And I think organizations can set some boundaries as well about what will and will not be tolerated and what will be addressed. And if you're someone who's experiencing a microaggression, look for support. Look for other folks who you identify with or identify with you, maybe even some allies, folks that you can talk to about your experience and get some support and validation around it. Because as we've talked about before, peer support is really important, and that shared experience is really important. And can also be very healing and a part of our self-care and our us-care. And then educate your organization about microaggressions and what they look like and what their impact is and how you aren't going to allow those to take place. So as we're starting to close, I want to just go back to our trauma-informed principles that we talked about last time in self-care and supervision. I want to, because I think that those are, again, when we're talking about intersectionality, I think that our trauma-informed principles can be very informative to us in setting up healthy and safe places for the people that we work with and the people that we are serving as well. And so let's do question number 7, please, Leandra. All right. And so as a review, if you were in my last training, I just want to see which one of these is not a trauma-informed principle. And so we have safety, we have transparency and trustworthiness, peer support, authority and accountability, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, historical, cultural, and gender concerns. So which one of these is not a trauma-informed principle? And so some of you were not in my last training, so this may not be familiar with you. I understand that. I just want to check in with folks to see if you were in my last training, if you remember what we talked about there. So, all right. We're getting some answers. Folks are thinking it through. That's exciting. Let's go ahead and post the results. Yeah, so the answer is authority and accountability. Authority and accountability is not a trauma-informed principle. Safety, transparency, peer support, collaboration, mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and historical, cultural, and gender concerns are. All right, thank you, Leandra. So, yeah, let's bring those up. So, yeah, here's our trauma-informed principles. So creating safe places for folks, creating places that are safe physically and psychologically for folks, that are welcoming, that are inclusive, that honor intersectionality, that honor diversity. That's really important. And when we are safe, when we create safe places and we're safe individuals, then we can create a relationship that includes trust. And folks can trust us. They can trust us as an organization. They can trust us as individuals that they want to work with. And so the more we're working to gain trust within our communities and the more we're transparent with our communities, it's just going to create healthy spaces for people. Talked a lot about peer support. The power of shared experience is really important. Creating spaces where folks can get together and talk about the different stresses and the different challenges that they're experiencing and ways that they can work through those or navigate those or do something different for themselves. That's really healing and powerful. And then collaboration and mutuality, that's where we're leveling the power field, where we're allowing folks to be empowered, allowing folks to have space around how they do their work or how they receive services, and that we're listening to folks and that we're being responsive to where people are. And that goes along with empowerment, voice, and choice. And choice is always really important because not one thing always fits everyone. So allowing folks to have choice around what works for them is important. And meeting people where they are is also very important. And then lastly, as we've been talking about today, the historical, cultural, and gender concerns and how important an understanding around all of those concepts are and how valuable they are into our work around our own self-care, our us care, the care we provide our clients, the healing work that we do, as we were describing earlier, it all relates. So this is my last slide. So where do we go from here? And so taking care of yourself is something that you can do. I know we talked about the privilege of self-care and some of the barriers and challenges around that. Those are very important to be aware of as well. And I just hope for all of you that you can do something that does take care of yourself and bring some health and wellness to yourself from that physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual place. Taking time to listen to yourself and others. What is it that your body is telling you? What is it that your self is telling you about what you need and being responsive to that? And then what are you hearing from others and how can you help them in their own health and wellness? How can we be responsive to both ourselves and others? Continuing to gain knowledge and understanding. As I said, like my training is not all the be all end all. And I encourage you to continue to engage in trainings around these topics and continue to do some reading around these topics. Explore some of the information of the people that I mentioned today, especially Kimberly Crenshaw. Really powerful, wonderful stuff. The more information that we gain, the better we're going to be able to be responsive to ourselves and others. And we can also bring that information to our workplaces as well as our and the services we provide folks. I'm definitely a proponent of acting with empathy, compassion, and integrity. And I don't know that I think we talk a lot about it and we are acting in that way, but if we really look at how we're responding to ourselves and each other, I bet we would find that we might not be acting with as much empathy as we need or compassion as we need. And I think that it's also important when we're doing this work, we have really important responsibility to the communities we serve, and how we take care of ourselves and hold ourselves ultimately impacts our clients. And so that's where I'm talking about integrity, having some integrity to our work and doing the best work we can. I say all the time in my position, it's really important that I take care of myself and hold myself in a place that's helpful to my team and hopefully encourages them to be able to take care of themselves, because how I impact my team impacts our service providers, which ultimately impacts our clients. And then lastly, start to create safe spaces that allow people to bring all of their identities to the space, to bring all of their experiences to the space, all the feedback, the ideas and suggestions, and that we listen and then we act responsibly to those pieces. So that's the end of the presentation today, and that's the end of this series. And again, I just thank you all for joining us today in this conversation. I am going to address some questions I see here in the chat, and we may have some more coming up as well. But yeah, I want to just thank you for being with me in this conversation today. I just want to thank you if you've attended one or all of the other sessions that we've done. Thank you for being a part of those. I really hope that they are helpful. Leandra and her team asked me to do this, and I was definitely willing to do it if it could be helpful to folks, but also realizing that if it's not, then, I hope that we can get you the resources and the training that you need. But I just really appreciate this opportunity, and I want to thank Leandra and the team for inviting me to do this. It's being able to put these presentations together has been helpful for me as well as my team, because they've been able to hear me practice talking about these things. And so we've all learned a lot through this process. So thank you for that. But yeah, let's look at some of the questions here. I know we had one about suggestions for language, which we did talk a little bit about. And then also we had a question about a better way to say target population, or to have target populate, or about target population. That one is hard. I generally have been, right now, I've been using priority populations, because those are some populations we want to make sure are included in our services and getting the right services that they need. And so I've been using priority. I don't know exactly right now if I'm really keen on that yet, but I'm still exploring what we could do better than target. I've also talked about using the word focus, focused services instead of targeted services, focused HIV testing instead of targeted HIV testing. I've just also used, not used an adjective with it as well. Sometimes we don't need to say anything beyond what it is. So that those are some things that I've been using right now. I also see a comment, COVID language like the word safe. Yeah, we're talking a lot about safety, and I think that's, I think I have some, we talk a lot about that when we talk about safe sex, for example, and I think that puts some judgment, some moral judgment on sexual behavior sometimes, and I think we've also been using the word safe around COVID, and I feel like there could be some moral value placed on there that may not work for everybody, and so just being aware of that and exploring if safe actually is the right word or not. I just think about it in the context of sexual health. When we use words like safe or risky behaviors, that may not be very inclusive and honoring of where people come from. Let's see. Priority population, Leandra says she does that. Focus population, yes. Does key population work? I think key population can work. Yeah, that's something to explore. I haven't considered that one. You definitely would, I think that works. I don't know. Sometimes I think through things really hard and I just start asking myself the question, who does that leave out, or how does that separate a group? I don't really initially come up on that in key population, but I think it could work. I'm hearing a lot of folks talking about priority. Can you give an example of inclusive language using the word marginalized? Yeah, that's a good one. Sometimes there's not just one word, but it's just talking about, I sometimes say communities or populations or individuals who've been left out. I usually frame it in that way, and people that we need to make sure are included in our conversations, included in our planning. So instead of using one word, I use larger. I try to maybe use larger contexts that are more inclusive and pull people in. And then the folks not feeling safe because of COVID and racial violence. Yeah, of course. So yeah, I think in the context of that and where people are not feeling physically and psychologically safe around these topics, that's when I talk about safe, that's what I really want to focus on, and where people are not feeling physically and psychologically safe. So thank you, for clarifying that. Any other questions or comments?
Hey, Robert, it's Leandra. Wow. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna connect with you. I didn't know if you had turned on the microphones or not.
Yeah, if you want to speak on the phone line as opposed to chatting your question in the chat box, you can press *# on your phone and then make sure your phone is unmuted locally to speak on the phone line. And if you decide to ask a question that way, just say your name and where you're calling in from before you ask your question. But you're also welcome to use the chat box as well. And again, that's *#. I'll put it in the chat box for you too.
Yeah, so any other questions or comments? Those are really helpful, and it's nice to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, I've been really enjoying this conversation around language, Robert. I think that, language is ever evolving, and I think that's the coolest thing about it, that we're constantly evolving and learning, and things change, right? I know that you used the term BIPOC earlier to describe folks. So a lot of people use POC or people of color, but it's kind of been transitioning into BIPOC in a lot of writing that I've seen, and just the way that people speak, to be more expansive of Black and Indigenous folks. So that's just one example, even in what you were saying during the webinar, of how terms can change. And, really with the SPD field and the sexual health field, it's really up to us to kind of take up those changes, right, and really use it in our research and use it in our writing as well. So language is so, so important.
Yeah. And I think that, in some ways, and going along with what we're talking about with microaggressions, it's sometimes this unintentional, when we're maybe not using sensitive language or paying attention to our language, has an unintentional impact, but that impact can be pretty big on people and make people feel pushed outside and not included and brought in. So yeah, exactly. And it changes over time. I think we're going to see new language as we keep moving forward, and it's just really important for us to keep up on it.
I'll give folks another second if they want to speak on the phone line or chat their question. I do have a question for you, but I'll give it a second.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Question for you. So this is in regards to boundaries and the boundary setting connection to self-care. So let's say you're someone that people tend to come to you a lot for support, whether at work or even in your personal life. And lately you found yourself not having a lot of capacity or bandwidth
Mm-hmm.
to be as supportive as you would like. So how can you communicate that, you know, you need that time to focus on yourself and your self-care right now without coming off to that person as you don't care or, you know, not wanting to hurt them or make them upset, knowing that they usually come to you for that type of support? How do you communicate those needs and those boundaries?
Yeah, I love that question because I experienced that myself. And, you know, I'm not always, you know, I don't always have a lot of capacity every day. And also when I'm being a supervisor, I also know that I need to have capacity for my team because I know that they're working hard and experiencing a lot of stress, but some days I just don't have it, right? And when you don't have it, you're maybe not always at your best self. But I think it's just important for us to be able to, if someone's coming to you, definitely like recognizing what they're coming to you with and just recognizing that, yeah, it's important and that, you know, it's hard. But I think it's also helpful for you and the other person just to be honest about where you are and that, like, maybe, and just being able to say, like, today I just don't have enough to be able to give you what you need today. But I definitely hear what you're saying, and I understand that you're having a hard time, and I wish that I could be more present, but I'm just not because I'm experiencing something else. I think that that's really important to be able to say that in a very honest way. But of course, it's also important to create a culture in your workspaces that makes that okay and makes it safe to be able to say that you're not in your best space today or you're having a hard day. And so, yeah, it's okay to not always be at your best place and being able to recognize that and get the support you need. But it's also, I just think that what I've witnessed is people not being so kind about it when they're having those exchanges. And I think that's kind of maybe what you were describing, Leandra. And so if we can just bring some kindness to the moment, not only to the other person, but to ourselves, I think that can be really helpful.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions, either in the phone line or in the chat box around this topic of self-care and intersectionality? Or maybe you have a question that you had from past webinars, from the first 3 that you didn't get answered, that ties into this, and you'd like to get that answered. Feel free to ask that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've covered a lot of material over these 4 sessions in these couple of months, so yeah. And always just know that, you know, my email address is here too. You can reach out to me, and that's great. I've had some folks from these trainings reach out to me, and I'm definitely willing to help if I can be helpful and make those connections. It's really nice to meet new people and talk about these topics with new people as well. So if you have questions later or you didn't feel ready to ask those in this space, please feel free to reach out to me. And always just remember there's a number 2 after my name because there's another Robert George that works with the city of Denver, it's a pretty unique name, but there's another one of me there. So I'm Robert George number 2.
Well, I will go ahead and do some wrap-up comments if we don't have any other questions. So thanks, everyone, for joining the webinar today. Again, if you've attended, even just one of the past webinars, we truly thank you for your time. And I hope that you found all of this information in this series useful and valuable, not only to the important work that you do in the field, but also just to your life overall. And I hope that you would share what you have learned with those close to you. So I want to say another special thank you to Robert, our presenter for this series. Thanks again for contributing your expertise and your knowledge to this series. We really, really appreciate it. And there's been some good engagement and really good questions that you've posed to us to think about. And I hope that has encouraged others to kind of do a lot of self-reflection themselves and figure out what self-care is to them and how they can act upon it. So just want to encourage everyone to please take the webinar evaluation once the webinar ends. You'll be redirected there automatically once we close the webinar. But it'll also it's in the links box as well, and I'm going to put it in the chat box as well for you to click on for easy access. And recording and slides will be shared via email to those who registered, and it'll be put on the NCSD website, so you will receive all of this information. And if you have questions, again, Robert's information is on the slide. My information here at NCSD is also on the slide as well if you have any questions for me. So I see someone typing. That was the last bit of my comments, but I'll see if we have any other comments or questions before we close.
Yeah, and please fill out the survey, as Leandra mentioned, because it's really helpful to me, and I know it's also helpful to Leandra and her team to know how to improve things or where to go from here and what some of your needs might be for information. So.
Yeah, for sure. I'm also interested in learning, I know we have 3 minutes left, what new things people have learned or maybe new techniques for themselves or new resources, if they want to throw those in the chat or say it on the phone line as well. I know we do the evaluation survey where we ask those types of questions, but if anyone has anything really quickly that they've learned from this series that they want to share with the group, that'd be great before we wrap it up.
I'd love to hear that too. It's been a quiet group, but I know you all are thinking about these things and have a lot to share.
And that's okay if not. I know that we wrap this up at 4:30, and some folks have to drop off at the 4:15 mark, because that's the hour mark.
Yeah.
So that's okay. If you do have any comments that you do want to share, feel free to share that on the evaluation. You can email either me or Robert as well with any comments or questions too. So with that, I want to say a big thank you, everyone, again for joining us. A thank you to Robert, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Take care, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Take care.